In April of 1872, the Wolf River in Fentress County, Tennessee, violently overflowed its banks. A massive wall of muddy water tore through the dense forested valleys of the Cumberland Plateau. Families grabbed whatever they could carry and fled to higher ground. As they looked back, they watched the rushing water swallow their log cabins, tear up their spring planting, and drown their livestock. But as they huddled on the ridges in the freezing rain, these families were dealing with something far worse than weather-induced panic. They believed they were enduring divine punishment for what they had done earlier that very afternoon. This storm would go down in local history as the Logston tide. The people of Fentress County saw it as the terrifying fulfillment of a dying man's final prophecy. Hours earlier, thousands of people from across the mountain had descended on a muddy field near Jamestown. They brought their families and dogs, gathering to witness the county's first ever legal hanging. Standing on a wooden box with his hands tied was 22-year-old Cal Logston. When the executioners sprang the trapdoor, the thick hemp rope snapped. They rigged a second rope, pushed him off, and the second line broke exactly like the first. As they prepared to drop him for a third time, Logston finally spoke. He told the crowd they were executing an innocent man. To prove it, he said, God would send a massive flood immediately after his death. The third rope held. A doctor pronounced him dead, and the crowds went home. By supper time, the sky broke open and the deluge began. For over a century, the story has forced a chilling question. Did the natural world actually intervene to protest an execution? Or did a guilty community seize on a perfectly timed weather event to process a deeply troubling chapter of frontier justice? To answer that, we have to go back 4 years, to November 1868. Life on the Cumberland Plateau was hard, isolated, and largely disconnected from formal law enforcement. That isolation made the Galloway homestead highly vulnerable. Neighbors arriving at their log cabin found a grisly scene: an elderly widow, her grown daughter, and a young grandchild lying on the floor, all slaughtered with an axe. But whoever swung the weapon missed one target. In the corner of the room, a 7-year-old boy lay severely injured with a head wound, clinging to life. 2 days later, the boy regained consciousness. When locals gently asked him who had committed the murders, he managed to speak a single word: Cal. That single syllable crystallized the region's grief into pure fury. The shock of the massacre instantly transformed into a targeted, desperate manhunt for Calvin Logsdon. The local authorities quickly built a motive. The widow Galloway was widely known to be holding around $300 in back pay and military bounty from a relative's army service. The money was missing. Suspicion fell heavily on Logsdon when authorities learned he had abruptly fled Fentress County. 2 sheriffs tracked him all the way to his father's house in Kentucky, arresting him under circumstances that painted the picture of a guilty man on the run. But Logsdon offered a vastly different version of events. In a formal written plea to the court, he insisted he had no motive, no money, and crucially that he had already left the neighborhood 2 full days before the murders occurred. He argued that as a Kentucky native and a complete stranger to the area, he was the perfect scapegoat. Logsdon claimed a local conspiracy committed the atrocity and then manipulated the evidence and the traumatized child to frame an outsider. This timeline maps out the chaotic progression of Logsdon's case. It reveals a legal process fighting against itself, fracturing into 3 separate trials across 3 different counties and requiring 3 distinct hearings before the Tennessee Supreme Court. Despite this heavy legal friction, the local justice system refused to let him go. The courts eventually pushed a first-degree murder conviction through, condemning him to hang. It took over 3 years of extreme legal maneuvering to finalize his death sentence. The sheer difficulty of securing that conviction highlights a deeply ambiguous set of facts, leaving a permanent shadow of doubt over his guilt. This brings us back to that muddy field in Jamestown in April 1872. The crowd was already tense from the brutal nature of the crimes. Watching a man survive the hangman's drop twice, only to curse them with his final breath, pushed the community into a highly primed psychological state. When the storm hit hours later, it devastated their fields, drowned their food supply, and washed away entire homes. That tangible, physical destruction permanently cemented Logston's prophecy into regional oral history. Today, the legend of the Logston tide is told with unwavering certainty. Yet the historical record of the legal case remains permanently clouded, filled with contradictory testimonies, a frantic manhunt, and a convenient suspect. This is how folklore functions. A community grappling with the trauma of a messy, deeply divisive, and potentially unjust execution needed a mythic event to make sense of the guilt and chaos. The legend of Cal Logsdon thrives precisely because the facts fall short. History left a vacuum of truth, and nature simply provided the perfect, terrifying punctuation to a dying man's final words, washing away the line between fact and folklore forever.